It's been a while, and for those of you who have listened to the podcast before, this is going to be different. It probably won't be as funny. Well, I don't know. Sometimes I go on a rant. Things happen. That's the point of the title. But today I want to talk about some pretty serious stuff, some pretty heavy stuff. So it's probably best if you're listening to this in a space where you can truly listen, where maybe there's minimal distraction, maybe you're in the bathtub relaxing and you've got a cool smart speaker that can get wet, or maybe you're curled up on the couch underneath a nice warm blanket drinking something tasty like hot chocolate to keep you warm. But this is not something you're going to laugh about most of the time. I also need to give a full disclosure. The things that I want to talk about today, I am speaking from my own experience and from my own knowledge. I am not a licensed medical professional. I'm a band director. I teach middle school kids all day, and so I do not have the expertise in a lot of the things that I'm discussing. So if the topics that we bring up are really hitting home for you and you feel like you really need some help, you can always reach out to me. I have professionals that I can put you in touch with. But when you're listening, please make sure that you understand from that perspective, I am not a licensed medical professional. I am not a licensed mental health professional. But I think I have a lot to offer from my personal experiences. This year has been unprecedented, and to say that almost feels cliche at this point. All that you hear when you turn on the radio or the TV or read the newspaper or look at the things on Facebook and other social media is all about the pandemic, all about COVID, all about the impacts that this is having across our country, across our people, economies, school systems. Learning growth is what I hear a lot about. What it's doing to families, keeping them separated, isolating people, and teaching us how to use a lot of technology that much of us didn't care to learn about how to use. But here we are, in an over-talked about, and honestly, probably little understood situation. COVID is not the reason I'm talking to you, but the effects that the pandemic are having on my students and on my coworkers is a good example of what I want to talk to you about. But it could be any sort of thing. It could be a little thing, it could be a big thing that would cause you to maybe feel the way that I describe. Ultimately, we're talking about depression and anxiety. And we're talking about ways to combat that. You can't make it go away entirely. You can't medicate your way out of it entirely. Sure, those things help. Counseling absolutely helps. But you learn to control and to cope and to move forward. And you use those experiences and those learning gains, buzzword, to better yourself as you go forward. And so what I offer to you today are some of those strategies. And this may not be just for middle schoolers. I know that I primarily talk to middle school aged folks, but I really think that some of us adults are really going through some things, and it could be helpful. So like I said, COVID is not necessarily the reason why you may feel however it is that you're feeling. And any way that you feel right now in this moment is valid. So that's the first thing to understand. All emotions are valid. All of them. The good ones, the bad ones, the in-between meh ones. And I know that we are pressured to always feel happy and to always be positive. And don't let our RBFs get in the way. But that's not authentic. Sometimes we just don't feel that way. And that's totally okay. That's part of life. That's part of being human. That's part of existing. And maybe COVID doesn't really bother you. I'm an introvert. I haven't had to deal with any COVID illness in my family. I'm very lucky. So for me, a reason to stay home is kind of a good thing. But there are other things that come up in our life that may have more or less meaning, that may hit us more personally, that could be absolutely affecting the way we think and feel in this moment. The moment is the most important concept. Because if you can get into the moment and live just for the moment, I think a lot of pressure starts to alleviate with the negative feelings, and it makes the good feelings even better because you're not second guessing them and you're not doubting them. There are things that you can do to help you be in the moment, to help you stay in the present. And it's little things. One of my favorite things in the world to do is I'm a collector. I like to collect things. I'm not a hoarder. Okay, we're not there yet in my collecting. But for example, I collect Magic the Gathering cards, and I probably have about 25,000 of them. And one of the things that really I love to do is I love to organize them. I organize them by the type of card, the color of the card, by what artwork is represented. I organize them in different ways. Sometimes it's numerical. And it's not the result of the organization. It is the process of touching the cards, of putting the cards in particular piles, and inputting the data into a database for me, because I'm in 100% in that space. And all that matters in that moment is the cards, is the feel of the keyboard, is the sound of the cards rubbing against each other as I switch to the next card. It's these delightful little details. You might not understand because maybe you don't play a lot of card games, but maybe you've gotten a Christmas card once and you open up the envelope and you're holding this card and clearly it's high quality. Like the paper, the cardstock used, the textures, maybe the smell, all of that sort of thing kind of just gives you this feeling, and it kind of just brings you in for a second. And for me, taking a couple minutes to just really focus on those kinds of details in the moment is important. When I play my instrument, I practice my scales a lot. Like, I don't play very much anymore, but I play scales. And scales I'm beyond the point of having to learn the technique of the scale. So that makes this a little bit easier. But when you play scales on an instrument, you cannot think about anything else. All you can think about is the scale. But then conversely, if you start to think too hard about the details of the scale, if you start to tell yourself every letter name in that scale, if you start to talk to yourself about how you might have played that note slightly out of tune, or maybe you were, I don't know, if you start to think about all those details, then the scale doesn't work. So playing a scale brings me into this state where I'm just in the moment experiencing the scale. Now, when you're very first learning, of course that doesn't work. You've got to work out the mechanics. This is at a spot where muscle memory is kind of taken over. But any kind of action, anything you're passionate about, can bring you to this space of, I am just completely focused on this, and it's not overwhelming me one way or another. I'm just experiencing. Okay, another simple pleasure, God, I used to love to do this as a kid, is I played baseball, and I would go running down the baseball field, and I would hold out my hand, let your fingers just hit the bars of the chain link fence. And there was a speed that it had to happen, and there was an amount of touch involved. And I don't remember why I was running around the field. I don't remember the things that were going around. I just remember the feel of my fingers grazing against that and being in that moment. And those little things, they're so tiny, but they really help center and ground you. So I would encourage you to figure out what those things are for you. For some people, it might be creating things by hand. Maybe you're an artist. Maybe you work with clay or with oils or pastels. Maybe you're a writer. And when you really get going, all you can focus on is the work at hand. Maybe you're a mechanic and you like to work on cars, and so you like the feeling of the ratchet as you're turning the bolts, assuming the bolts are cooperating with you. Nobody likes to work on a bolt that's stuck. Maybe you're a carpenter and it's the smell of the wood and the texture of the wood. Maybe it's just washing dishes. And that practice of being in the moment for me started with washing dishes. We didn't have a dishwasher when I really started thinking about this. And so I had to talk to myself about what I was doing. Okay, here I am putting my hands under the water. Here's the soap on my skin. It started that deliberate. But eventually it became into this place where I'm just thinking and feeling of what's happening to me right in this moment. Now, our brains are not ones to be controlled. So, of course, when you're in this Zen spot, occasionally something will just pop up. And that's okay. Ellen DeGeneres used to do this. She did a great stand-up special in the late 90s, early 2000s. She did a couple of them. And they were fantastic. If you haven't seen them, by all means, go watch them. But one of the things she commented on is how when you're trying to go to sleep, a jingle from a commercial would just pop into your head. The example she used was a deodorant commercial by Menon. And you would just out of nowhere. I remember this commercial from when I was a kid. Out of nowhere. Boom. There comes this weird thought. So when you're in the moment and you're doing the thing that you enjoy doing, that you can really kind of just lose yourself in the actions and emotions, those thoughts are going to come. Those emotions are going to come. Here's the trick. Don't hang on to them. Let them come. Let them go. For me, in my experience and how I can best handle myself, I think of emotions as waves. And so when you go to the beach, it's even better if you can do it with a puppy or a baby. You go to the beach, and puppy and or baby, or both if you're real lucky, stands just at the water's edge. And they can feel the sand in their toes, and they start to get that look on their face. Maybe not the puppies so much, they're not very facial expression oriented. And the water is very shallow, right? It just barely comes up above your toes, and it feels very cool. And in Florida, that's refreshing because it's so hot here all the time. Okay, but then that first wave comes. And your first experience with a wave coming at you is kind of frightening. But then the wave goes away. So for a moment, you're watching this wave and you're like, the baby's probably thinking, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. Maybe they don't have the words for that, because I don't think they have language yet. But you get the idea. But in a second, it is over, and the wave recedes. Now, the wave doesn't just disappear. It just lowers in intensity and kind of fades away as another thing comes to the fore. And you have to be willing to let go of whatever comes in. So when you're doing that action that helps keep you present in the moment, if the feeling that arises is something sad or something very stressful, then I think you need to let it come and let it take its natural course, and then let it go. I watch teenagers, and myself as a teenager when I experienced this, one of the struggles was I would get in this place where I was really depressed, really rock bottom, laying in bed, not wanting to get out, and I would listen to music, which can be helpful and cathartic, But the problem was, I didn't want to let go of the feeling. I didn't realize that was what was happening, but I would do things that would encourage that to stay. So I would stay laying in bed and I would wrap myself and stay in the darkness. And I would keep that song that was eliciting these feelings and amplifying these feelings. I would keep that song on loop. And then the depression would kind of just breed and it would last longer and I would get broody. And I can see a lot of youth really struggling with that right now. They are feeling these intense emotions. And for whatever reason, I don't understand, and maybe a mental health counselor can help you discover why, but for whatever reason, they don't want to let it go. That's not to say that it goes away. It just recedes. And then you learn strategies to cope with. Like a wave. It comes, but the water doesn't go away when the waves go away. It just recedes. Some of you are going through some really dark stuff. Honestly, stuff that I cannot understand. I really genuinely can't. I've tried. I will sit down and I will really sort of meditate on the experiences of my friends and of my family and of my students, and I cannot. I just don't have the life experience to understand. But if I could encourage anything, find a way to stay in the moment that you're in and recognize in that moment all of your feelings are valid. All of them. Let me give you an example. And this is not for pity. I am very much okay with what has happened in my past. But my father passed away when I wasn't a kid, but I was a very young adult. I was 22 and I was an idiot. And I didn't know what to do with it. And he was very sick for a very long time. We knew that his death was coming. So there were a lot of trips to the hospital. There was a lot of family drama to navigate. There were a lot of other situations that arose because he was dying. It was incredibly stressful. And knowing, waking up every day and knowing that you could get that phone call that day. And so honestly, when he first passed, the first thing I felt was relief. I felt like I could breathe. I knew that it was over, the situation was done, and then I felt horribly guilty. I'm like, I feel relief because my father has passed away. But it's natural. And it's okay. So whatever thing that you're going through, whatever is really just got a grip on you right now, whatever you feel about it is valid. But let the feeling come and let the feeling go. And don't dwell on the what ifs. Don't get caught up in this place where, well, if I had done this differently, if I had gone to the hospital one more time, maybe I would have been able to do this. If I would have went home to visit 6 months sooner, maybe he would have been able to get a liver transplant. I can't, thinking about those things does not change anything. All it does is stir the anxiety and depression pot. You cannot change anything that happened a second ago, a blink of an eye ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. All you can do is work in this moment. And in this moment, you take steps that ensure you are healthy, that you are working towards a better version of you. You can't control the future either. You can have a plan, but we all know what happens. There's a thing called Murphy's Law, if you haven't heard of it. He lives at my house a lot. He spends a lot of time there breaking my house. But Murphy shows up when you least want him there, and his main goal is to disrupt your plans. So if you get stressed out about the future and trying to plan all these what ifs, you're not going to get there, and you're not going to be in that place that you need to be in to start pursuing good mental health. The only way you can be healthy, in my opinion, is to be in the moment. When I think about anxiety as well as depression, but anxiety specifically, will have certain strategies that help you address the anxiety in the moment. And they really talk about grounding a lot. And there are certain things you should do when you are feeling a panic attack or high anxiety that will bring you back to this moment. Those tools and those strategies, that's it. That's the thing right there. The deep breath, feeling your feet on the floor, getting back to that moment. So the more that you practice being in the moment, the less likely you are to be overwhelmed when that anxiety comes, because you will have practiced the strategies. You won't get it right the first time. You won't get it right the 145th time. You're going to make mistakes. Some days you're just going to hug on to that depression and anxiety, and it's going to drag you down. But you have to realize that this moment will cease to exist in a second. And so you can try again in the next moment. Everything begins again in the very next moment. Don't worry about what decisions you made. And for those of my listeners who are younger, who haven't really had to take on these huge decisions for yourself yet, there are not always right or wrong answers. And I think, when I was growing up, I was always get so mad at the adults in my life for not making what looked like an easy choice between black and white, between right and wrong. Every decision is far more complex than that. It's not about right or wrong. It's about taking care of yourself in the moment and doing what you think is best for yourself. And then when you have yourself taken care of, then you're able to take care of others. So that's the other point. Some of you love your families so hard, and you work so hard to take care of everyone in your family, to the point that you really kind of wear yourself out and you're tired. I see some of you in the things that you take on to preserve your families, and you're so tired. That pattern will not last. You can't sustain that. That's like getting in the car with a gallon of gas and trying to run errands all over Orlando or whatever city. But Orlando, you're going to run out of gas in about 3 seconds, because I-4 traffic is not to be trifled with. And it feels selfish to some of us. And I think that comes from some of our Christian beliefs for some of us, that it feels really selfish to take care of ourselves first. But if you are beaten down, if you are in an unhealthy place, you don't have the resources to help somebody else. If you're so tired you can't function, you're not going to be able to function for your family at the highest level possible. If you're a teacher right now and you're really struggling with this hybrid pandemic teaching, you first, then the students. There is no shame in that. There should be no guilt in that. But it's very hard. It's hard to accept that. And a lot of this, I'm speaking to myself. Wherever you are right now, whomever you're with, whatever your situation, in the moment, in this very moment. And whatever you feel it authentically, recognize it. Maybe it's a name it and claim it situation, and let it recede. In my opinion, that is the natural flow of emotion. They're waves, presence, and waves. This might have been meandering, this might have been disorganized, maybe this didn't reach you or apply to you. But I hope that it helps for some of you. And if you truly need help, please do not be ashamed to ask for help. And if you need me to help you connect with a mental health professional, no matter what your age, I know enough of the professionals in the area. I can get you hooked up with a person that's going to match with your personality and give you the tools you need to live in the present and ride the wave.